next speaker is Professor Hanri Mostert. And Professor Hanri Mostert is an internationally renowned researcher. She specializes in property law with a focus on land as a scarce resource of public importance. After completing her doctorate at Stellenbosch University in 2000, supported by the Max Planck Institute in Germany, she has held academic appointments at Stellenbosch, the University of Cape Town, University of Groningen, and our research has shaped local and global perspective through our involvement with the International Alliance for Land Tenure, the South African Law Commission, and the World Bank. Professor Mostert advocates for engaged citizenship, responsible autonomy, and the judiciary role in fostering accountability and trust in property law. Recognized by the National Research Foundation and numerous prestigious fellowships, she was a finalist for the South African's Young Women in Science Award in 2012. She's also one of the co-editors of this book. Professor Mostert, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Adenike, for that introduction, and also for hosting this wonderful event. I really appreciate it, and honored to participate. I must also say was such a privilege to work with this group of editors on the Net Zero book, which I have here in front of me. I have a few slides, and I would like to share them if you will. It seems as if if you can just allow me to share, please. Thanks. I thought what I'd do is to talk a little bit about the chapter that I wrote with my co-author, Ms. Lindsay Moses, who is a PhD researcher at the chair, but also give a little bit of context in terms of the work which preceded it and the work which we are busy doing at the chair at the moment. So that the chapter 9 in the book is the chapter of myself and Lindsay Moses, and that is titled Extractive Justice and the Net Zero Transition, African Perspectives. And now I have to see how I move forward. I'm not going to say much about the energy transition minerals in Africa. Damilola has mentioned that already, that Africa is a hotspot of these minerals being situated. He mentioned cobalt, for instance, lithium, copper, platinum, vanadium, zinc, nickel, and a whole range of rare earths are also present on the continent. I won't say much more about this. I think it's been covered. Perhaps I could say something about the work that has preceded this chapter. And that was a commission for Professor Charles Fombat and Nico Statler, which was published in their series Constitutionalism in Africa, African Constitutional Law. And the chapter was titled Custodial Resource Holding as an Expression of Constitutional and Economic Intent in Africa. And what I did in that chapter was to go and take a look at all the constitutions in Africa and how they express resource sovereignty. I came up with a system dividing the constitutional expressions of sovereignty into direct, indirect expressions, and then also noticing the constitutions that had no specific expression of sovereignty. In addition to that, then reading the statutes of these various African countries to take a look at how the resource laws express resource sovereignty, and the combination of reading the constitution as well as the resource statutes gives one a pretty good idea of the division or the what is the word, the temperament of each of these jurisdictions' approach to resources and resource sovereignty. To give you an indication of what we found, especially, maybe I should, yeah. So listed it all, and then looking at the vesting clauses and the benefit clauses in each of these laws gave us a pretty good idea of what kind of resource management or resource holding was present in each of these countries. Now, I mention this because I think it's important to understand entering as we are entering and transitioning through the net zero pressures, to understand what is present on the African continent in terms of legislation and constitutional support for a changing environment in the mineral and resource context. Um, I'm now in the 10th year of the chair that I hold for mineral law in Africa, and over this time, the landscape has changed so dramatically when it comes to how resources are being managed and held in Africa. And what we see, and this is especially interesting when you read the constitutions and the legislation, is more and more a move towards a stewardship or a custodianship approach to mineral resources. Some of the examples from clauses I have here on the screen: South Africa, Zambia, Uganda, Zimbabwe. There are several others, and it is quite noticeable that a legislative amendment that has happened over the last 20 years uh, incorporate both the vesting and the benefit clauses that support an idea of a custodianship model for resource holding in Africa. Um, this brings me to the chapter we did for the Net Zero book, in which we used some of that insights to take a look at how the transition would work, and especially the pressures of extractive justice, or the demands of extractive justice as an interpretative paradigm for understanding the net zero transition and how it would work in the African context. So we started out looking at resource sovereignty and the holding models, and then also the tenets of extractive justice, which I will pause at a little bit longer. And then we looked at several possible case studies. South Africa, Uganda, and Zambia were on the short list. Not all of them made it into the actual chapter because of length constraints. But then we compared those systems, looking at procedural justice, distributive recognition and restorative justice, also cosmopolitan justice, and had some insights. So we started out with South Africa, Zambia, and Uganda, but eventually we wrote up for the chapter, we only wrote up Zambia and South Africa, looking at the presence of expressions of these various tenets of justice as the interpretative framework, looking at procedural aspects, how distributive justice is being articulated in the laws of these different jurisdictions. We also looked at restorative justice, where typically it's around mine closures and restoration. We also considered recognition justice, especially the consultation and consent requirements that are prevalent and are becoming more prevalent and more important as jurisprudence starts supporting the provisions in the law. And then also cosmopolitan justice, the idea that we are all part of a much bigger system, and how legislating and managing resources on the African continent resonates with the needs and the demands and the pressures from outside of the continent. Some of the insights, very briefly. First, that Africa's regulatory systems are not yet ready for the hike in energy transition minerals and the extraction thereof, and that there are especially shortfalls in relation to the distributive and the restorative aspects of the justice framework. So that is where the legislation can be bolstered. But what we did notice was that in systems where custodial resource holding was already prevalent, and that means In other words, the legislation that had been changed or amended over the last 20 to 25 years, there seemed to be a better readiness towards the shifts that's going to be required and that are being required for the just energy transition. And then our final recommendation was for a concerted engagement with responsible sourcing. And that takes me to then this research is positioned in a line of work that we're busy doing at the chair, and it takes me to the next project that we engaged in, which was a collaborative project interdisciplinary with an institute at UCT, the Future Water Institute, supported by the World Bank's Social Development Team, and then Mineral Law in Africa is one of the partners. And in that we are looking, the work is not done yet, but we're looking at the effect of the transition on coal communities, specifically in South Africa, since South Africa is steeped in a history and economic reality of coal being an important export product, and then what we did was looking at the coal value chain in South Africa, and what was going to be required to upcycle the industry from coal to an industry which is supported by the just transition. Apologies, there are just people that walked into my office now. I'm just going to ask them to come back later, please. Then if you look at the value chain and coal specifically, as far as the upstream part of the value chain is concerned, as the energy transition takes place, there's going to be a declining demand for this commodity in South Africa. It will lead to closure of mines, it will lead to job losses, and the pressure there would be around economic diversification and job creation. Then in the side stream industries like transport and infrastructure, there's also going to be an impact, job losses. There's going to be lame infrastructure, and a huge repurposing of existing transportation and infrastructure will be needed. Then we looked further at the processing aspect of the value chain, and observed that what is going to be needed there is a conversion of plants to support the new industries, and a focus on recycling specifically. And then as the coal value chain goes into the energy, the generation of energy, there are also going to be pressures for the transition to alternative sources, and there will have to be timelines for phase out and the integration of resources. And then the environmental and rehabilitation aspect of the value chain, the land reclamation, the water treatment, the mitigating of air pollution. What will be necessary there is planning, accountability, financing. And my takeaway from doing this study, it really is about, how do I move on here, is about how the legislative design can support the just energy transition. You need more than one expertise. Here, there's mineral law, energy law, sustainability law, but this is embedded in a much larger infrastructure of administrative and property law that will also need adaptation and shifts in order to enable a just energy transition. So when we talk about transitioning employment, economic diversification and investment incentives and a people-centered approach and redirecting the value chain, we realize that the legislative framework can support this transition in a profound way, but we're not there yet. A lot of work still needs to go into that. I think I'm going to leave it there for now, and there we can talk further during the discussion section. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor, for that wonderful presentation.